Fabulous. So welcome to the Ideas UK and Innovation Network Knowledge Nugget. And today we are delighted to have with us Tony Wakefield, who is the CEO of Outcome One Training, and he's going to be sharing his knowledge and insights on creativity and the brain. It really is a bit of a family affair today because I have my niece Izzy sat with me on work placement for the week, and actually Tony is Connor's dad, and you'll be familiar with Connor because he administers all of our sessions for us. So very much a family day today. So I think most of you know Ideas UK, a not-for-profit organisation to support organisations to really develop the processes around innovation. And we are, as always, delighted, as I say, to have the Innovation Network with us, who support us with these kind of short, sharp knowledge segments today. Before we go into the session, however, I'm just really keen to highlight that the Idea of the Year competition is open to entries. So our last competition that we were able to have a formal award ceremony was back in 2019 when the West Midlands AHSN took away top honours. But since then, Abu Dhabi Ports won in 2020 and the Ministry of Defence took the crown in 2021. So the competition is open to entries that have been implemented within the last 12 months. So we really are looking for ideas that have outcomes. So what's the benefit being to your organisation of those ideas? So the competition is open now, and I will be sending some more details on how to enter as well, because it's free for all member organisations to enter. So please do start thinking, because the closing date is the 20th of July. And this year we will actually be celebrating our awards alongside our two-day conference in Tewkesbury Park on the 9th and 10th of November. So we also hope to see many of you there, and please ring fence that budget now. It's quite a small hotel actually. So if you are keen to be in the conference hotel, then registration sooner rather than later is definitely advised. But for now, I'm going to leave it there, stop sharing, and hand over to Tony, who will introduce himself and talk to us about creativity in the brain. So Tony, over to you.
Thank you. Good. Can everybody see that okay? I just need to just grab my chat back up again and participants, and then we're good to go. All right, so welcome. Thanks for the opportunity to present. And what we thought we'd do today is look at creativity and the brain, because we've got lots of ideas in terms of what we should be doing as leaders to try and drive creativity in the workforce, to try and drive creativity throughout the organization. But sometimes we don't really understand why we're doing it. We just know that sometimes things are good ideas, but actually there's some really fundamental things going on inside the brain to really back up some of those ideas. So before we get into it, what I will do is I'll just introduce myself. So I'm not just Connor's dad. I've also been training for 25 plus years. So I'm the CEO of Outcome One. So Outcome One is a leadership and management training company. I'm full-time actually with Ray Castle as well. And Ray Castle is a sort of telecoms and high-tech training company, which really deals with the nuts and bolts of innovation and creativity. So things like 5G connectivity, cloud, all that sort of stuff, the sort of things that underpin a lot of creativity in business. But Outcome One itself is very much more soft skills oriented. I've also been a member of the leadership and management, which has changed names over the years variously, but for 30 plus years. Previously, I've been the founding MD of Informa Telecoms and Innovation Academies, and I've worked with Grant from the Innovation Network extensively over the last Grant, what do you think, 15 years, thereabouts. I've worked with Google, Vodafone, HP, MTN, and for those who are on the call from the Middle East, Etisalat, for example, we've done some management training courses with Etisalat, for example, and I was also in the Navy and flew in the Navy for a while as well. So that's me. Okay, so we've got at Outcome One, we've got lots of training courses. One in particular looks at the brain and looks at the brain from a leader's perspective. So we've got a really nice, not extended, it's a fairly short training course, but it's I think it's about 16 hours in total. One of the things that runs through it and is consistent is creativity. So what we've done for this session is we've just brought out some of the main themes in terms of creativity, just to present some ideas. And of course, we've only got 30 minutes, or 30 to 40 minutes. So we've got to be pretty concise with it. So we brought together some of the main themes. So the first thing really to look at is a simple model for leaders, for the brain. And this really isn't new. This is going back to the 1960s. This is Paul D. McLean. This was his model that he came up with, called the triune brain, that some of you may have heard about. So a lot of what we sort of look at in terms of brain operation, you can model around this particular model. Now, what I've got to say is models, these are just models. You know, if you're looking for medical accuracy, you're in the wrong place. These are just models for leadership. But the brain essentially can be split into three different structures. You've got the reptilian, and you know, whether you believe in evolution or not, that is the most basic brain structure that we've got. It's about survival of the individual. It operates subconsciously, and you've probably heard the term fight, flight, or freeze. There's a few different interpretations of that, but that's really there to keep us alive. It controls our breathing. It controls a lot of the sort of automatic bodily functions, but also it's there to give us a shot of the right chemicals when we need it to defend ourselves. We've then got a really important structure really for this session, which is the limbic. So this is the second most developed part of the brain structure. So this is really about survival of the group. It operates primarily subconsciously. And if you think about it, you know, this is where we are most of the day. This is, you know, when you're cooking in the kitchen and you accidentally put something in the fridge because, you know, you picked something up which is unfamiliar, but you picked it up from a place that you normally keep a certain fridge-based product, and you put it in the fridge automatically. I think we've all done that sort of thing. That's your limbic kicking in. That's just really low energy. It's just there to give us everyday operation. But the thing that really makes us human is the neocortex. It's this part of the brain, the most advanced. You find the neocortex in some other mammals, but in humans it's huge. You know, it's incomparable to any other living thing, but it gives us complex problem solving. It operates at least partly consciously, and it gets us into real issues, real problems. It allows us to project forward. It allows us to think about things that haven't happened yet. It allows us to worry. It allows us to do some good things as well, solve problems and check what we're doing is right, or whether we need to change course or whatever. So it really gives us control. And the big thing is that only one of those structures can be in charge at a time. So we've got reptilian there, which is like the all-terrain, get us out of difficulty part of the brain. You've got the automatic economic limbic system. So this is like everyday driving on the roads. You know, we don't need to do anything else when we're driving from A to B except pay, you know, scant attention to our driving, just like driving your car. You can go from A to B and forget the entire journey, right? I mean, that's it. That's the limbic for you. That's us sort of operating in automatic mode. And then you've got the neocortex, which is like sport mode. It takes a lot of concentration. You can really get the best out of the motor, out of your brain, out of your body if you're in sport mode. And that's your neocortex. But we can only be in one structure at a time. We can only be really using one structure at a time. So what's that got to do with creativity? Well, Daniel Kahneman, in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, which you might have read, points us to the fact that we've got two networks in the brain. So from his point of view, in terms of the way in which the brain operates, and certainly in terms of creativity, we're either using effectively what turns out to be the limbic or the frontal cortex. So system 1 or system 2, as he calls it. So when we're operating in system 1, we're in what's known as cognitive ease. So we're optimized. We're operating on low energy. It's efficient. It's simple. We use shortcuts. So, you know, if something happens, some trigger happens, we've got an automatic response, which means we can operate at very low energy. We're pretty much unfocused. We're just letting things wash around us. But actually, we are more creative. If we can get ourselves into default network operations, system one, we are more creative. However, we do make more mistakes. We put the wrong things in the fridge, for example. On the other hand, if we're operating it with the control network, it's what we call cognitive strain. We're less efficient. It can be quite tiring, actually. If you're studying for an exam and you're really trying to make sense of information, really trying to build models around information that you're trying to understand, it can be really tiring. But we've certainly got more control. We're certainly more focused. But actually, because we're focused and we're following pathways in the brain, which we've either already made or we are making in very specific ways, we're less creative. We do make fewer mistakes. So the default system is enabled by repetition, familiarity. If you get people working on familiar things, repetitive things, they've got more energy, they've got more bandwidth, if you like, to be creative. Whereas on the other hand, if we are in cognitive strain, that's enabled by presenting information in a very confusing way. So where people really got to work hard to make sense of things. And the point is that only one system is operative at a time. So we're going to come back to that. And that's going to be a big part of what we're going to look at in terms of creativity and trying to get the best out of our people. So creativity and innovation are primarily about brain state and motivation. So having just looked at those brain structures, which we'll come back to later on, probably something else worth looking at is some of the key drivers in nature. So looking at neuroscience in terms of not brain structures now, but key chemicals. So the easiest way really to explain this is that we've got chemicals, which are used really to transmit information between different parts of the brain, between the to make the connections in the brain. And there's probably over 100 chemicals that have been identified, but we're going to just concentrate on sort of 5 or 6 here. And we can pull it back to what's happening in the wild. And, us as animals, earlier in our evolution, again, if you believe in evolution or not, these are some of the sort of key chemicals that either kept us safe or allowed us to go hunting and survive. So just focusing on the left-hand side, when we're in a survival situation, when we're the prey, we have endorphins, and that gives us a real sense of euphoria, gives us a very hit of positivity. It allows us to be very focused, and of course you would be focused if you're trying to get away from a predator, right? So your endorphins, I think most of us have heard of endorphins. We've probably also heard of adrenaline and cortisol, and unfortunately these go together with endorphins. So we get a hit. If we've got to get away from something fast, we get a hit of endorphins and adrenaline and cortisol. That prepares us for the fight or flight. Now, if we sort of flick over to the hunter side, dopamine. So if you're on the hunt and you're really, you're just approaching the prey, we've got that anticipation. It's the anticipation of the kill, the anticipation of achieving the goal that gives us a hit of dopamine. And it's really addictive, very addictive. This is why there's real issues with dopamine and drink and drugs and, gambling and things like that, because it's the anticipation that really gets us. It's a quick hit of focus. It gives us motivation. It gives us arousal as well. Assuming that this goes well in terms of the hunt, we then think about what happens after the hunt, dominating the kill. And once we've got something which is going to keep us alive, the kill, we've got well-being, happiness. And this helps us with cognition, our memory, our sleep, our learning. And of course, hopefully, certainly sort of pack animals, certainly animals which socialize, we then think about sharing the kill. So oxytocin. And oxytocin is another key chemical. So that's generated by and promotes bonding and sharing, generosity and trust and group survival. And as it happens, We need dopamine and serotonin for creativity. We need oxytocin for group problem solving. And on the downside, on the left-hand side, if we have too much stress, adrenaline, cortisol, that kills creativity. So you might be thinking, well, what's this got to do with the workplace? Well, as it happens, it's got everything to do with the workplace. Your dopamine, your hits of dopamine when we're out celebrating, when we're doing fun, new things, that really does promote creativity. And it comes back to this hunter-prey situation. It's the same chemicals which are flowing around your brain. In terms of serotonin, that feeling of well-being, if you achieve things, again, constantly achieving things as a group or individually generates and creates creativity. And on the right-hand side, oxytocin, if we're in a group which is really well bonded and we share ideas and we encourage each other, that really does promote group problem solving. And on the left-hand side, too much stress, too much adrenaline, too much cortisol really kills creativity. So that's the basis. So we've looked at the brain structures and now we've just looked at the brain chemicals. So what's our role as a leader? Well, the way in which we sort of determine somebody's personality and their attitude and how they behave, there's really three components to it. You've got the primary personality, which happens to be set quite early on. So this is, if you want some sort of standard definitions for that: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. So the ocean way of sort of determining primary personality. So that's really set. So that's set early in life. That's you as a person. But actually it's modified, massively modified by your past experiences, as well as the environment in which you're currently operating, whether that's a work environment or your home environment. But together, collectively, these really give us not a primary motivation or primary personality, because that's set. If we like music, we like music. If we like dancing, we like dancing. But our secondary motivations, and they can change because that's really dependent on where we work, for example, or who our boss is, and whether our boss uses carrot and stick, or whether our boss allows us to be much more creative and autonomous in what we're trying to achieve. So it gives us our secondary motivations and our behaviors. So hopefully by now you're getting the idea that as a leader, we can certainly determine the environment. Very difficult to determine somebody's past experiences or to work with that. That's things like hypnotism, neuro-linguistic programming. I know that there's a few question marks about those sort of techniques, but that's how we might dig into past experiences. We can't really do much about genetic programming too much, but certainly in terms of a leader, we can look at the environment and we can lead with neuroscience. We can really do things that make a difference. So we've looked at those brain structures. We've looked at some of those chemicals. So the question is, what does it actually mean to us? What does it mean when we actually get into the workplace? What can we do as leaders to really maximize the creativity? And there's quite a few things actually, but the basis, the foundation for this is brain structures and chemicals. So creativity, as it happens, it's been shown through research that we need high levels of dopamine and serotonin. So to put that in layman's terms, we need to be stimulated but safe. If we feel stimulated and safe, so if we're in a meeting and we want to pipe up and give our ideas without feeling that we're going to be ridiculed, and everybody else is sort of coming up with ideas, but we feel safe to be able to do that, that absolutely is the best way of creating or giving us the conditions for creativity. But also we need low levels of cortisol. So if I said to you, you've got 2 minutes to come up with the best idea ever, or you're not getting paid this month, that's obviously, that can be quite stressful. There's no way you're going to be creative. There's no way you're going to do your best work if you've got high levels of stress, cortisol and adrenaline flowing through your brain structures. So that's creativity. But we also think about group problem solving. So how do we be creative in a group? So we've got high levels of oxytocin, and that, don't forget, that's bonding. That's about us feeling part of a group, and it's about trust, and it's about things like avoiding groupthink. If you're sat in a room, have you ever been in the situation where you feel like you need, for some reason, you've got to agree with somebody? You don't really agree with their ideas, but you just feel like you've got to agree with them for some reason. And actually, that's the oxytocin. It just isn't there. You don't feel the trust. You don't feel bonded to the group. You just feel like you've got to follow the crowd. And again, that's not great for creativity. So what can we actually do? As leaders, what can we actually put in place? And there's quite a few things we can do. So as leaders, we can try and build trust. We can encourage collaboration. And we'll look at some of the things we can do specifically in a few minutes. And we can do that team building. And if we put all of those sort of things in place, and of course, this isn't an exhaustive list, then we start to generate those high levels of oxytocin. It's creating trust in the group, it's avoiding groupthink, etc. We can keep things fun. We can mix it up. We can swap jobs for a while. We can recognize people and achievement. And if we do that, we're really playing with dopamine. So we're actually giving people hits of, new things, anticipating things that are different and things that are fun. We're keeping that dopamine quite high. And we can focus on psychological safety. So people being able to speak up in a meeting. We as leaders, we can respond positively to failure. So if somebody doesn't get something right, we don't see it as failure. We just see it as an experience point. We can check in with our teams. If we do that, we're playing with serotonin. And again, it's not, the list isn't exhaustive. And of course, the final one there is we can keep, here's a big one. We can keep toxic people out, right? How much time do we spend on toxic people as leaders? Sometimes. We can minimize bureaucracy. Do we absolutely have to insist that somebody puts in, every time that the last receipt for a certain expense, or they're not going to get the money up, at the end of the month? We can choose our KPIs carefully. If it's wrong to have financial KPIs, for a particular group, why do we insist on it? It just creates stress. All of that creates stress. And that's really what we're trying to do there, is we're trying to keep the levels of cortisol and adrenaline to a minimum. So that list obviously is not exhaustive, but there's some of the things we can do as leaders, and that's really playing with those chemicals. I said, don't forget there are over 100 chemicals, so we're just really simplifying this. It's, but I think as a model, it works really well for leaders. Some things we can do, some additional things, are things like storytelling. And there's a lot of work being done on storytelling, certainly in terms of leadership training at the moment, looking at ways of boosting hormones and neurotransmitters. So, for example, if you wanted to get your story across to your people, or your message across to your people by using storytelling, there's some really simple ways that you can build in. For example, suspense, a cliffhanger. You can tell a story. You can tell a story about the way into the building. In the morning, about how you're followed by somebody, and you can really sort of string this out really nicely into a really suspenseful sort of cliffhanger type story, and that'll get the dopamine flowing. I mean, what you're doing there is you're actually getting people primed for creativity. You can talk about pride and recognition. You can give your story as an organization in terms of, where we came from, where we are now as an organization. You can really generate that pride and that recognition, and you're focusing there on serotonin and oxytocin. You can talk about empathy and generosity. And a really key thing with oxytocin is that your levels of oxytocin increase, not necessarily by you being generous and showing empathy, but even if you just watch an act of empathy, an act of generosity, somebody giving a homeless person some, a burger or something, that will get your oxytocin massively increased, just from purely observing that fact. So storytelling is absolutely fantastic as a tool for playing with these brain chemicals. The actual way in which you present information, there are lots of different ways of presenting information. So we could look at the emotional impact of presentations, PowerPoint, like we're doing today, written emails and memos, videos, visuals, and of course storytelling that we just talked about. People who live in the prefrontal cortex, so sometimes that includes academics, right? They love white papers. But can you imagine seeing a white paper being presented on Facebook to tell you about, how good teeth whitening products are? And, it just doesn't make any sense, does it? We've just got to match the way in which we present information with really the brain chemicals and the brain structures that we're trying to trigger. So we can look at creativity in terms of rapport and emotion, and comparing modes of presentation. We could look at office space. So we could look at the actual physical office space itself. Now, we don't really have too much time in this session to explore really what's best practice in terms of office space, the fact that you need wide horizons for creativity, that sort of thing. But what we can do is just look at one or two things. So you could look at whether you've got assigned seats or flexible seating, whether you've got private offices or open plan, because actually this determines things like private offices with assigned seating, great for focused individual work, where creativity isn't such a big requirement. So that's where you really need to do perhaps repetitive tasking, which is time limited. You could have private offices with flexible seating. So that's great for small group creativity. So that allows them to bond. It allows them to, in a very safe way, to share ideas. You could have assigned seats, an open plan, focused group work, for example, or probably the best really for creativity is silo-free creativity and innovation coming about with open plan, flexible seating. So lots to think about in terms of the actual physical environment itself. Of particular interest, though, I think, is how we actually get to the point where we are taking creativity and starting to turn that into innovation. So innovation is creativity for the purposes of building value. Creativity on its own could be, good fun, but it might be valueless, certainly to an organization. But as soon as you start looking at creativity and you start to sort of make that into a valuable thing, then we've got to think a little bit differently. We're back to Daniel Kahneman's model. So we've got the default network. So this is really what we need to be in terms of idea generation. And this is default network only. We need the mind to be in creative mode. We need the mind to be wandering. We need to give it free rein. So you've all heard the terms brainstorming and quite a few other terms associated with that. It's absolutely key to creativity. So you've got the mind wandering, but we need to bring that back to some sort of, to be able to create value from it. So we've also then got to engage the control network. So we need to sort of flip backwards and forwards. So we need the ideas, but we need to be able to evaluate those ideas. And that's where the control network comes in. So this is, control network. We need uncreative mode. We need focus. We need to be able to specifically evaluate ideas. So these two things absolutely pull against each other. So we're going to need a framework, right? If we're going to really take creativity and we're going to run with it, we need a framework. I mean, some organizations have absolutely no way of even capturing ideas, no way whatsoever, let alone actually evaluating them and trying to capture the most valuable ideas. So we're going to need some frameworks, but let's just start with the creativity itself. And I'll pop this on here because Connor will tell you I have my best ideas when I'm on my bike. Always have done. And the reason is because it's ticking all the boxes from a brain perspective. It's familiar. For me, it's familiar. I ride quite a lot. It's safe. Well, as long as you're not in massive traffic, but it's safe, which means I'm in cognitive ease. if you really dig into what's happening in the brain, wide horizons, unfocused, because actually brain focus follows visual focus. So if you're really focusing in on some sort of paper in front of you, not only are you visually focused on the paper, your brain is also focused, highly focused. So actually, if you're in a situation where you're unfocused, wide horizons, in terms of creativity, that's the ideal situation. My mind wanders. Now, sometimes we need to do something called episodic priming. So episodic just means that it's not about knowledge, it's about things that have happened in the past. And I do that quite often when I'm on the bike. I think about what's happened earlier in the week. I think about who said what to who. And then my mind wanders. And before I know it, I have one of these proper light bulb ideas. Ping, I just realized how to solve a problem at work that I've been mulling over for the last 2 weeks. There's a few other things, like light is important. So circadian synchronization. So actually getting the right light at the right time. So for me, that's a big thing. So if you're in a room with good natural lighting, or if you're out on your bike, that's ideal. For me on the bike, it's distraction free. Nobody can reach me. The phone's in my back pocket, but it's on silent. I only use it if I want to use it. It's deadline free, and it's emotionally neutral. I'm in the default network. I'm absolutely in the default network, and I'm safe, and I've got the right chemicals flowing around the brain. But remember, this is just about ideation, nothing more than ideation. So how do we actually take ideation, the actual creativity itself, and make that into some sort of valuable, innovative project? And this is, I'm sure that Connor and Grant recognize this method. So this is, for example, design thinking. This is one of those frameworks. This is where we start. We really use divergent thinking, really, that mind wandering, to understand the problem before we bring it back to really define the problem. And then from that problem, so we can we're sort of priming it now for the next step, which is divergent thinking, to really understand or to start the mind wandering process, the actual ideation behind the solution, maybe several solutions, no matter how daft those solutions are, because we're not yet at the point at which we then evaluate it. It's here where we evaluate it. So this double diamond thing that Connor and Grant talk about, absolutely aligned with brain function completely. Or you could do other things as well. You don't have to go for this really good sort of framework to try and get the best ideas from your people. It could be just simple suggestion boxes. Or you could give pet project time. So I did some work with Google a few years ago, and Google famously give their workforce a certain amount of time to work on their pet projects during the week, and that works really well for them. It could be things like employee competitions. When you think about it, what you're doing is you're actually getting those right chemicals working and the right structures working. So there's quite a few things we can do. Obviously, that those techniques are not exhaustive in any way. There's things we can do to enable creativity in the longer term. It doesn't all have to be about the here and now. So when we look at our people, we can look at creativity and ideation. We're trying to get people to generate new connections. We can use the episodic system. So that's where we really start off with things that have happened in the past, things that we recognize, timelines, and if we let people do that in a very creative, mind-wandering way, that primes the creative pathways initially. So it's not knowledge-based; it's more about things that have happened, and then let the mind wander, and then that takes you into a very creative state. So we can enable that. We can give a creative boost. We can activate that default network. Just pretty much talked about that, to be honest. And then we can also look at long-term creative capability. So neuroplasticity, the way in which our brains change and reshape in terms of the connections. So it's not too long ago that we thought that the brain was pretty stable. You know, your brain structure sort of got to a certain point just as you sort of came out of childhood, and it stayed pretty stable for the rest of your life. But what we now know is that neuroplasticity, the way in which the connections change, is, you know, a big part of us changing behaviors and getting better at things. And of course, that's the same for creative capability as well. Tasking. This is a big thing. So we've got the mundane on the left-hand side. You've got the stimulating on the right-hand side. And you've got to understand your people to know where they operate best. So do they really need stimulating tasking, which comes with quite a few risks, or do they need the mundane? And probably most people have got an optimal point. So that's what we might call stretch comfort. So they're still safe, but they're also, you know, they've also got the right sort of dopamine flowing as well. So we can get them operating in the right place. Fantastic. If they operate too far to the left, too mundane, the motivation really goes. If we operate people too far to the right, probably the confidence goes because it's too stimulating. They're learning too much too soon. And if you want to improve the organizational capabilities, if you want to get people doing more in the long run, then perhaps you sort of try and get them operating here in a very safe way. So moderate stress, slightly uncomfortable, allows us to develop and slide right, because this over time becomes green. Everything slides right. If you really want creativity though, you probably let them come back into the green. Very safe, at least for a time, at least while you're trying to be creative. So ideally, tasking is aligned with preferences and motivations as well. Too far right, way too far right, we go right into the fight, flight, fight or freeze. So we're right back into the reptilian. Okay, so is there a checklist? Yes, there is a checklist that we could use as leaders. So with all of that in mind, with the brain in mind, if we're looking at individuals, we probably need to make sure that we adhere to something like the 5 S's. So people need to be safe. So if we're going to get maximum creativity out of them, we need to be safe. We need social inclusion. You know, we don't exclude anybody. Everybody is valuable. You know, and when it comes to creativity, you know, everybody is valuable to a certain extent, but everybody can become more creative over time. Need to ensure that people have got self-esteem and they feel valued. They've got a certain amount of self-governance and autonomy. Now, if you're working in a call center, you need people to do repetitive tasking. We're not talking about self-governing or autonomy, but then we're not talking about creativity either. So this is very much focused on creativity. People need a shared purpose. They need motivation. They need rewards. And again, if you'd really analyze this is about the right chemicals flowing at the right times. And if we talk about teams, on the right-hand side, we can use the share model. So are we supporting and coaching our teams, both internally and external to the organization? Are we bringing in the right sort of competencies? Do we have high levels of collaboration? And as leaders, have we actually facilitated that? Have people acquired the appropriate competencies? So do they feel safe? And back on that tasking bar, do we have people in the right place operating at the right level? Are we asking them to reach for stretch objectives, which keeps them stimulated? You know, that's the dopamine kicking back in again. And of course, running through everything in creative organizations should be entrepreneurship and creativity, getting the right frameworks in place. So key takeaway really is that leaders can really boost creativity and value creation. And it's, you know, in terms of the way in which the brain works, there's only a few things probably that we need to understand. Then that leads on to lots of different aspects in terms of creativity, a huge amount of things that we can actually do. So that's it. So that's 20 to 11, I think just about on time. Just a reminder, you know, this material has come out of some of our courseware. So we cover a lot of other areas as well linked to creativity, and we sort of build a brain map as well, individual brain map on those training courses, which is really neat. It gets people to really think about the way in which they're operating and what they can do better. Okay,
Brilliant.
right. I think we're right for questions.
Yeah, brilliant. So I've got a few written down.
Yeah.
So I just want to cover the last one that was sent because it relates to the last slide that you showed. So in regards to those models that you just showed a minute ago, what's the biggest thing that's in the way of leaders applying these ideas?
I think an understanding of your people. That's it. Which is why I think there's a massive gap in terms of organisations and individual leaders actually understanding the way in which the brain works. Now, Conor knows how much I've been banging on about how the brain works over the last couple of years, because there's a huge gap. But if you've got that basic understanding, you don't even really need these models. I don't think these are just really simple tick models to help us as leaders and actually puts us in a safe place, because we don't have to understand everything about the brain. We don't have to understand everything about our people, but something like this, a small, tick sheet would ensure that we're doing most of the things right most of the time. So I think a general understanding, but also us actually having the right chemicals flowing around our brains at the right time. So if we're stressed, what can we do to ensure that stress isn't transmitted down to our people? So have a real understanding of how we're going to get the best out of our people in the organisation. It's education, I think, to be honest.
Definitely. Okay, that's a great answer. So at this point, I do just want to say, I understand we are over time, so no worries if you do have to leave. After these questions, so we just got a couple more questions. We are going to be giving away a free seat to our effective hybrid collaboration session. So if you want to stay behind for a chance to win that position, then feel free to stay behind if you do have an extra bit of time. And Tony, are we okay to take a couple more questions? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so I really like this one from Chris. And Chris, actually, if you could maybe just give us a little bit of context once I've read it out. Any thoughts on the Apollo 13 duct tape and cardboard scene where the Earth-based team have to find a way to build a CO2 scrubber from spare parts? That feels quite stressful, yet they were required to be their most creative. Was something else going on that Hollywood didn't show? So a great question. And Chris, am I right in thinking that's sort of unlocking creativity in high stressful situations, which obviously sort of contradicts that sort of those brain chemicals from earlier?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. I watched that clip. I watched the film many times, but that clip is they stick people in a really stressful situation and they get to build them out of cardboard and duct tape. And it just doesn't feel, well, from what I know, that sticking people in those situations, they probably weren't going to get it right. But that's what Hollywood portrayed.
Well, in a past life, when I was flying in the Navy, we used to operate in very stressful situations on the back of a frigate or a destroyer, trying to fly that helicopter with weapons and just really intense sort of stress to the outside world. But actually, for us, we were trained, and it's that training that made everything familiar. And actually, it was familiar enough that we could still, if we came up against any problems, we came up against lots of problems. We were we had the right chemicals flowing to allow us to be creative in that situation because we understood it, and because we had a lot of trust in the people that we're working with. We operated as a flight of about 10 people. We understood each other and exactly the roles that everybody in that team had to undertake. If I had to shout an order to get something done, it wasn't with any sense of malice or anything. It was just to get above the noise so that people could then sort of kick in those automatic responses, lots of automatic responses on the back of that ship. And it was all down to training. It was all down to training and safety. And probably what you found is that the Apollo guys working on the Apollo project there, we're in the same boat. It is to the outside world, it's extremely stressful. To them, it's stressful, but don't forget, you actually need some levels of adrenaline to maximize productivity as well. So it's always a balance. It's making sure that you're not going over, too far over the boundaries into making it very difficult, too difficult. Yeah, training.
Brilliant. And there's just one last one that I can actually help out with answering. So what does working online give the same innovation results as face-to-face sessions? So my immediate response to that is I think you can if you use the right tech. So if those of you who went to my my tech safari, you'll know I'm big into tech. So what we found at Innovation Network, overseeing a lot of people's innovation projects in different companies, is that you can make online work if you use the right tools and you have the right setup. Okay, so there's some ground rules that you want to stick to. So for instance, cameras on to make it more immersive, and some collaboration techniques that you want to sort of facilitate. But other than that, we use digital whiteboards. We find that digital whiteboards sort of hold people accountable, as well as giving you a process that you can all follow from the comfort of your home. So we have found that using those sort of tech does give us a little bit of leeway to do the online and have it work as good, or if not better. We have had some people say that it works better online. But I'm just wondering, do you have any brain aspects to that online versus face-to-face?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is about making connections, isn't it? So I think you're absolutely right in terms of videos on. Now, that's really difficult because I train all the time, and sometimes people are working from home, and it's not practical for them to put the video on. But if we're doing something which is more sort of soft skills, where it really requires understanding and thinking and a little bit more experiential, I'll sort of almost insist, but I'll give people time to get themselves in a situation where they can, where they could then put the videos on. So you can give them a couple of days notice, just say, we've got an expectation that videos will be on for this. So they might then, to put it bluntly, tidy up and, make sure they're in a situation that they're happy to show the background, or even, talk to people about getting the right virtual backgrounds. But it really is about that safe space thing. And again, some people online, they're a little bit less willing to stick their head above the parapet and talk about things. So for example, we do training for big companies like Vodafone, and you've got people on a webinar from all over the world, but the people have no idea who else is on the webinar. So they don't feel safe. They don't want to put their head above the parapet. So what you can do is you can get people to introduce themselves. So I know that, sometimes you go on training course, people don't introduce themselves, but they should if they're going to be together for a few days or, a few hours, because that gives them the safety. They know that they've got like-minded people on the webinar, and then the breakout rooms are great because they can start in a very safe way, just with 3 or 4 people. They can initially get to know those 3 or 4 people very quickly without having to assess all the rest of the group, because again, it's safety, isn't it? It's about being able to contribute in a very safe way. So introductions, getting people to work in small groups, really encouraging contributions, you asking them really simple things so they can come back with a very simple contribution rather than having to, put the reputation on the line, which is what they often think they're doing. So yeah, it's just trying to replicate what we've got in real life.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to very quickly hand out a free seat, and then I'll hand it back over to Zena. So let me just share. We've got the biggest wheel we've ever had, full of so many names. So essentially what we do every month is we spin this wheel. It's full of all of your names, and whoever it lands on will get a free place at our effective hybrid collaboration course. So if you go back to Tony's share model, the H goes for one of them was for better collaboration, and that'll make your teams more creative. So this session is all about that, making your team more collaborative, to unlock that sort of creativity, to get you to your innovation goals. And I've just had a message from Grant, so he wants me to be extra generous and give away 2 seats. So that's what we'll do. We're going to spin it twice very quickly. So the first spin we're going on lands on Sukanya. So congratulations. I'm putting my email into the chat. So if you want to email that, Sukanya, then we'll get you your free place on that session. So congratulations. And we're going to spin it one more time. And the next free seat is going to Sarah, Corey. So congratulations to you both. You can both attend our session for free, absolutely free, and we look forward to having you. So my email's in the chat, so definitely claim those and take advantage of that opportunity. But without further ado, I want to hand it back over to Zena just to close up. I do apologize that we're a little bit over time, but Zena, do you want to close off the session?
No, that's brilliant, Connor. And just to say that those places can be virtual. So wherever you are in the world, you would still be able to attend. So do please get in touch with Connor, because that's a great opportunity. There have been so many questions today and a fantastic talk, Tony. So thank you so much. You've had a great audience attendance. We've had a couple of requests for the presentation. Certainly, we have recorded today's session, so we will make the link available. And if there are a few slides perhaps that we could get off you, Tony, that would be fabulous, and I will circulate that to everyone. However, please be aware and join us for the next session, where we have a grant on our next Knowledge Nugget on the Tuesday, the 12th of July, talking about metrics. So how do we measure innovation is a perpetual question that we get. So we will be attempting to certainly shed some light on that at the next session on the 12th of July, and very much linked to what Tony was talking about today, and empathy. And it is our National Empathy Day this week on the 9th of June. So it might be worth thinking about what you can do from certainly the Empathy Lab talk that we've had recently around building your empathy or empathy with your team. But for now, thank you so much to Tony. Thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. I will definitely send out the link for the next talk, and Claire, please drop me an email to make sure you're on our distribution list and get in touch. So thank you very much. Thank you for today.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody. Take care.
Thank you.